Lester, much of your recent work over the last 5 years has been trying to kind of map the historiography of contemporary worship music. And so, as an example, when we go and look up the history of contemporary worship music, maybe on something like Wikipedia, what is it that we see when we get there, and how accurate is it?
It's partly accurate. So everyone will know that old story about the multiple blindfolded folks, each one taken to a different part of the elephant.
Yeah.
And they're asked to describe the part of the elephant that they're touching. Their descriptions are accurate, but you don't get a picture of the whole elephant.
Mm.
You know, it's like a tree trunk to whoever's holding the leg. It's like a snake, whoever has the tail.
Yeah.
You know, it's like a fire hose, whoever has the trunk. And that's what the Wikipedia entry on contemporary worship or contemporary worship music is. The part of the elephant that Wikipedia is holding is the Jesus people part of the elephant. And so the typical story you get is that it's all about music and the new music driven by guitars, which was kind of novel. I will admit that.
Yeah.
And it's about all these new songs and about how out of the hippies writing these new songs, you start getting the creation of the first Christian worship music companies like Maranatha Music. And then whenever that comes into conversation with social scientists like sociologists or ethnomusicologists who tend to frame things in terms of social dynamics or cultural dynamics, they'll portray it as this whole way of worship arose because of cultural upheaval, which the late 1960s certainly was. And that is part of the story. But it's just the leg of the elephant. It's not the whole elephant. Or, you know, social dynamics. I think what it misses can be explained in a variety of ways. One, it's more than just Jesus people.
Okay.
In fact, the history I've been working on with some others actually roots the history 40 years earlier. I mean, I have a standard phrase for like, how do I put it? So like while the first future Jesus people were just learning their ABCs in the mid 1950s, a dynamic theology of praise and worship and early praise and worship, contemporary worship practices had already been taken by missionaries to the Inuit and the Canadian Arctic.
Wow.
So to start with Jesus people is a little bit too late. And therefore, to explain it all in terms of social upheaval or cultural dynamics is a little bit too limited too. I mean, the folks I've been working with in my own work, what we've really been finding is how critical ruminating on the Bible has been. There are multiple biblical theologies that really start as the headwaters for the whole phenomenon. And which makes sense because the phenomenon more broadly falls within what we would call free church worship,
right.
Which has been around for several hundred years. And the critical factor in free church worship, one of the critical factors has always been being true to what it is that you find in the scriptures. That's what you're free. You're free to follow scriptures. And so to walk that dimension out of the recent history is really, it's inaccurate and an anomaly. So it's overlooking the people beyond the Jesus people, and it's overlooking the motivation of theologizing on the Bible and wanting to be faithful and true to the Bible.
Fascinating.
Can I add one other thing right there, Win?
Yes.
I think by emphasizing the Bible, it also recasts the history of the worship wars, or at least it gives a different lens to it. Yeah, I mean, the nice thing about being a historian, and you are too, is it essentially is a playful activity of being able to view the world from someone else's viewpoint.
Yep.
So once I really got locked on to the fact that what's really motivating these people is a desire to be faithful to Scripture, all of these innovators for this new way of worship, all of their antagonists are heard as asking them to be unfaithful to the scriptures.
Mm-hmm.
And so think about that. If you feel like you're promoting this new way in order to fulfill what it is you see in the Bible, you're not going to listen to some poor liturgical historian sap like me, who's telling you that, this doesn't fit, 1,500 years of liturgical tradition. You don't give a squat about that. You want to be true to the Bible.
And that's deeply endemic, right, to the American experience, Christianity in America. That's the post-Reformation, right? That sense of, I can come, that common sense realism, I can come to the Bible and actually experience it. And my gosh, if I can, and God's speaking to me, like, it's my duty and my burden to promote that and to share that with others. I'm accountable to God, right, to do that, right or wrong, right? And so you get this, that's part of that marketplace, element too, that we're talking about with the Catholics, even of that sense of an inward or even small communal interpretation of scripture as true, because we're free to be able to come to the Bible and experience it and take it. And then you get this plethora and diversity and beautiful chaos, I guess, as people try to interpret worship.
Yeah. I mean, thanks, Wynn. You've just framed my narrower history in its own broader sort of history. This is not a new story. It's just a different phase of it, once you cast it in terms of that. And in some ways, what you said is particularly fitting for the man that I'm identifying at the very beginning of the Headwater. He's a retired businessman who's never held a pastorate his entire life and has no formal theological training. And it was actually a single day of prayer out of desperation when he's a visiting speaker in a little Pentecostal church out in western part of Canada, that he starts grappling with the 2 or 3 scriptures that will serve as the centerpiece for his eventually highly developed theology of praise. But he has no credentials per se.
Yeah, that sounds right.
But the amazing thing is if you look at his theology and what he taught, and you go any place in global Pentecostalism, you will find his teaching. Wow. Even if people are completely unaware where it came from. One of the doctoral students here made a funny meme for me one day, which I use for my desktop sometimes. And it's on one side of the meme is a picture of Karl Barth, the well-known 20th century theologian. Right. I mean, just world-renowned theologian, has written and published more books than should be legal. I mean, that Karl Barth. And then the other side of the meme is this retired businessman, Reg Lizelle. And the inscription at the top says, one of these 2 men is the most influential theologian of the 20th century. And then at the bottom it says, and the other one is Karl Barth. Which is a little bit of an overstatement. But if you're thinking about someone who made the initial steps in developing the theology of worship that now captivates global Pentecostalism, right, and much of evangelicalism, I think you can make a case it's Reg Lizelle who's impacting Sunday mornings much more than Karl Barth.
Yeah, that's fascinating.